Alright, so what we have here is our space inside our alveoli, and this is a type 1 pneumocyte, and notice that it's very thin. It's about half of a zero point 0.5 of a micrometer, so maybe it's like 0.2, 0.25 micrometers. And then you have a few, so the capillary endothelium, so again, remember capillaries, they only have that tunica intima, right? That very thin layer of one cells. So they actually fuse their membranes together over here, and the overall thickness is only 0.5 micrometers. Now again, this is not millimeters, this is micrometers, which is, again, micrometer is 1/1000th of a millimeter. So it's very, very thin. And what we see here is that we have surfactant. And why do we have surfactant? Well, again, the inside of when you breathe, your body is wet and humid, and so are the inside of your lungs. The thing is that what happens if you are before our plastic bag ban here in Hawaii. So what happens if you have a plastic bag and it gets wet? Well, what if you try to inflate and open up that plastic bag? The surfaces are going to stick together, right? So this is what surfactant helps to do. Or if you've noticed, like a Ziploc bag, when you open it, it's kind of like greasy, slightly greasy, and it does have a little lubricant. So the surfactant is kind of like a lubricant that prevents your alveoli, say your alveoli collapse and the walls touch each other. If you didn't have the surfactant, they would stick together like a plastic bag. I know, like, I feel like Katy Perry. Do you ever feel? I'm not going to sing, but yeah. So then, thing is that surfactant helps to break up that surface tension so that your alveoli, if they collapse, they don't stick together due to that cohesion and the surface tension of the water. Alright, so then what we have here is that, again, the capillary walls and the alveolar walls together, when they're fused together in this membrane, it's only half of a micrometer. Now, with a sheet of paper, like if you have any sheet of paper right here, I mean, that's like the average thickness of a sheet of paper is about 0.1 millimeters. And if you do the math, well, what's 0.1 divided by 0.5? So the blood-air barrier, this little thing right here, is only 1/200th as thick as a sheet of paper. This is a very, very thin interface between your inside of your alveoli and your capillaries. There's a very, very thin layer. So capillary walls are thin, alveolar walls are thin. Together, they're still very thin. Again, thinner, way thinner than a sheet of paper. But why are they thin? Why is this important? Well, again, things that which is going to be easier to diffuse, a thicker wall or a thin wall. If you have a thinner wall, you have increased diffusion. And let's compare, like, so here we're a conducting zone and a respiratory zone. So so this would be the air we're breathing in, and this would be, like, say it's a cross section of your trachea. So all the air, if it actually somehow reached your blood vessels, it would have to go through the thick mucus, it would have to go through these thick pseudostratified columnar epithelia, it would have to go through all this dense connective tissue here, and finally reach a blood vessel. And any carbon dioxide would have to take that same path. Now the respiratory zone, well, again, this isn't to scale, but if I drew it to scale, you would have a thinner sheet of cells, these are your alveolar cells, and you would have your capillaries flushed right against these alveolar cells. So which is a faster path, going through all these layers right here, or going from here to here and here to here? So this is why your conducting zone doesn't actually exchange gases with your capillaries, because you have all this substances and tissues between this and your capillaries, whereas in your respiratory zone inside your alveoli, you only have a layer of two cells that's very, very, very thin. By being very thin, you allow efficient exchange of gases between your blood and your air. Alright, to sum it up, so conducting zones, this is pretty much everything outside of the respiratory bronchioles and your alveoli. And the respiratory zone, this is your respiratory bronchioles, alveoli, and the ducts that connect the alveoli. So what we have are like tall, simple columnar cells. So again, these are, by being taller, this is going to generate a thicker layer of cells. Whereas the respiratory zone, you have those very, very flat and thin type 1 pneumocytes, or type 1 alveolar cells. And conducting zone, you also have cartilage. You have not only that dense connective tissue, you have smooth muscle, you have cartilage. You have a lot of layers to go through. Whereas the respiratory zone, you don't have cartilage, and then you have smooth muscle in your conducting zone. Respiratory zone, you don't have smooth muscle. Instead, you have like elastic fibers. And actually, you have elastic fibers in both. So elasticity is important to the flexibility and your ability of your respiratory system to flex and expand and contract and dilate. And you have cilia. So again, cilia are the ones that, those little projections of cells that help to move mucus and anything trapped in the mucus up and out of your respiratory system. And respiratory zone, you don't have cilia because again, you want the purpose of the respiratory zone, exchange gases between your blood and your environment. So in the respiratory zone, you have those type 2 pneumocytes that make that surfactant, and then conducting zone, you have mucus made from those goblet cells. So yeah, those are the big differences between the conducting zone and respiratory zone. To summarize, conducting zone is everything connecting from your nose and mouth to the inside of your alveoli. Your alveoli and the associated bronchioles, these are your respiratory zone. That's actually where you bring oxygen in and offload carbon dioxide. And again, why does that happen at the respiratory zone? Because it's very thin, you have easier time for these gases to diffuse across that barrier.